So I'm going to talk some about Ananda. Some of the other Buddhists also who will be giving talks here will be talking about the different disciples of the Buddha. Maybe some of them will also cover Ananda, but I have a particular interest in Ananda as a therapist and somebody who uh, really feels an important inner need to be supportive of all beings, but particularly supportive to women. I see quite a few young, medium-aged, elderly women in my practice, and I just feel a calling to be supportive. So Ananda was the disciple of the Buddha who, in fact, well, this is not gonna be happy here. Hmm, okay. Let's see if I can figure this out. Um, who was in fact very involved in the support of women and was instrumental in having the first order of bhikkhunis in Buddhism. We'll talk about that. So during the time of the Buddha, this particular area of Magadha, which is where the Buddha was from, um, and this area is on the map here. As you can see, it's kind of north central. And I've blown it up here a little bit, and you can see that in the one corner, the upper corner, there's the place where the Buddha had his retreat, Sarvasti, where the retreat is. And then you can see that there was also where Deer Park, uh, where he gave his first talk, his first discourse. Certainly Bodh Gaya, where he sat under the Bodhi tree for enlightenment, and you can see where Vulture Peak was, where he gave many of his discourses, important discourses. So you can see this area called the Ganges Valley is an important area of during the time of the Buddha. Now, if you look up the research on what life was like for women in India at the time, you're going to get some conflicting reports because the familiar story was that Vedic women were free starting around 1500 and then around 500 BCE, and they suddenly lost their freedom. And that's greatly exaggerated and oversimplified. If you look more deeply into the research, you will find that early Vedic society itself was very patriarchal. The evidence for a golden age of equality is overstated. There were women, Gargi and Maitreyi, who demonstrated that women, some women, particularly elite women, could participate in serious intellectual and religious life, but that did not establish general equanimity. That was very much an exception. So at that time, 1500 to about 600 BCE, there was a long term tightening of patriarchal control that happened just before 500 BCE. And this was no single event in Magadha around the Buddha's time. What did change during roughly the later Vedic period and the centuries surrounding the Buddha was the societal structure of northern India changed. Because in the early Vedic world, there was substantially more pastoral and kin-based communities, and this system provided a more central role for women to be respected in very small communities. And so as what was called the second urbanization of this area, um, during this first millennium BCE, especially around 600 to 400 BCE, the Ganges plain underwent what historians called the second urbanization. Settling from agricultural areas intensified, the iron technology expanded, cities and trade routes grew, kingdoms replaced or absorbed many of the older clan-based uh, political units, and hereditary social distinctions became increasingly important. So, when there's a law, land and money to be had, patriarchal power is grabbed. This increased competition for wealth had major consequences for women. Once land, accumulated wealth, inheritance, and patrilineage descendants became increasingly important. Controlling who produces the legitimate heirs became increasingly important as well. Women, sexuality, marriage, and reproduction consequently became matters of family property and lineage continuity rather than merely an individual love relationship. So this was a kind of like the beginning of the caste system in India, which became formulated around 300 BCE, particularly in Hinduism. But at roughly the same time, the class proto-caste system distinctions were becoming more elaborately theorized, and Brahma literature increased systemization and rules and governing marriage, inheritance, sexuality, ritual, purity, etc. And so there were five of these proto-castes: the Brahmins, the rulers and the warriors, the agriculturalists and the servers. And so if you look into the research in more detail, you'll find that the scholarship specifically connects that the growing importance of agricultural land property and surplus production with increasing male control of property and women having diminished economic position. And then Stephanie Jameson's work on the women's obligations um, traces the increasing concern with guarding women's legal status, making rules about adultery, inheritance, marriage, etc. And this happened over a period of several hundred years around the time of the Buddha. So at the time of the Buddha, this was really becoming a major force in the societal circumstances. So Magadha, which actually was divided into the east and west areas, the eastern Ganges region was culturally somewhat different from the old Vedic higher heartland. Further west, it became an extraordinarily fertile territory for these obligation movements for women, and the Buddhist Jains and others, renunciant groups, which challenged significant elements of this Brahma religious authority. This became an area of conflict and concern. So the new possibilities for renunciation um, created a radical social possibility for women. A woman becoming a bhikkhuni was something that was rather extraordinary. The idea even was extraordinary, stepping out of the societal structure of the daughter, wife, mother, widow, under male household authority, and then becoming a renunciant, a member of a religious community, and a practitioner pursuing liberation. That was a unique idea at that time. So I'm giving you the background of what was going on at that time. So at this time, this is when the Buddha starts his order of monks. And there are no women in the order, just men. And one of the major disciples of the Buddha was Ananda, who was born on the same day as the Buddha. His father was the brother of the Buddha's father, and so they were cousins. And he attained stream entry at his first range retreat. When the Buddha and Ananda were 55 years old, the Buddha entrusted him to be his steady attendant. And Ananda had been a monk for 18 years by that time. He was so capable of a teacher of the Dharma that the Buddha did not hesitate to ask him to take his place when he himself was unavailable for teaching. So so great was Ananda's mastery of the Dharma that many times the Buddha might not have been available, and Ananda would give the talks. He would declare, Ananda amongst is wise, one of great understanding. If you have questions for me about the matter, I would have you ask Ananda. You would be able to answer. He was admonished a few times for rather minor things, I guess we would say. Um, there were a few criticisms, one by Venerable Maha who um, actually was critical of how he defended women monastics in certain situations. That sometimes he said that he wasn't supervising the young male monks sufficiently around the women. So at times he would be admonished, but he was always very modest and respectful. On another occasion, Ananda was sewing robes and gathered a group of monastics together to sew robes, and they got involved in some discussions, and this was overheard, and the Buddha admonished Ananda for encouraging idle chatter among the group. But as an attendant, Ananda was extraordinary. Uh, he was cared for the Buddha in many, many ways. He wasn't just an attendant, but he was really a full-time caring person for the Buddha. He was his caregiver when the Buddha didn't feel well. He would take care of him, etc. He was also a go-between between the Buddha and many of the other monks. And he protected the Buddha. There were times where the Buddha, Devadatta, who was interested in killing the Buddha and taking over the Sangha himself, he tried to kill the Buddha a number of ways. One time, I think this was when he got an elephant trunk and directed it to charge the Buddha. And Ananda threw himself in front of the Buddha, ready to die himself rather than to let the Blessed One be killed. And three times the Buddha had to ask him to step back, but he didn't comply. And the Buddha actually had to physically move him gently out of the way. The Buddha was able to calm the elephant. He was foremost in 5 categories. But really, the one that really stands out to me is the fact that he had this extraordinary memory. So he was able to listen to the Buddhist talk and then repeat it word for word, which is extraordinary. And this came in very handy after the Buddha passed away because all of the Buddhist talks were not written down. They were recorded inside of Ananda. And maybe in a later talk, I'll talk about how it is that Ananda had to become an arahat in order to be able to join the first Buddhist council after the passing of the Buddha. And then he taught the other monks all of the 84,000 discourses that the Buddha gave. And then that was memorized and that was passed on for generation to generation for 400 years before it was written down. You can imagine being able to pass down the exact words of the Buddha without mistakes for 400 years. I think that's even better than AI. So this phenomenal memory is something that we can ascribe to Ananda. He could immediately remember. And so he also had an agreement with the Buddha that if the Buddha gave a talk when the Ananda was not present, that he would give the same talk again to Ananda, so Ananda could remember it. So he received from the Buddha 82,000 talks, and from the other bhikkhus another 2,000 more, and therefore there are 84,000 talks, discourses. So his advocacy for women is what I really would like to focus on, because this is very important. So the Buddha's aunt, Maha Pajapati Gautami, she was the person who cared for the Buddha and fed him from her own breast after the Buddha's mother passed away right after childbirth. So she was very close to the Buddha. And there were a number of times where she came to the Buddha and asked if she could also become a monastic to form an order of bhikkhunis. And the Buddha would usually respond by saying, don't be in a hurry, don't be so eager, the time is not right. So Ananda was affected at challenging this development. He didn't just argue abstractly for social equality. He asked the Buddha whether women are capable of attaining stages of awakening. We use logic. Now remember, the Buddha was in a time where there was this tremendous pressure to maintain a separate society for men and women. And so and the Buddha was very radical in many of his ideas. And so adding women to the monastic order that would not have been done by other teachers. This was a very rare request. So he was careful about this. So when the Buddha answered yes, then Ananda had established a crucial premise. Whatever social distinctions the society makes between men and women, they do not constitute a difference in their fundamental capacity for liberation. So during the Vedic period, women experienced high levels of freedom, perhaps certainly more than right around the time of the Buddha. So the legal subordination, the loss of educational rights, property, inheritance was changed. Many constraints. So at the time of the Buddha, women had lost their rights overall. They had been taking place over hundreds of years prior to the Buddha, and the cultural and society structure at this time was completely misogynistic. So the Buddha had established a Sangha community without deference to nobility, without discrimination against the poor. Everyone in the Sangha was treated as equals. There was no stratification based on social status. However, women were excluded from being ordained. But due to Ananda, this was about to change. So the Buddha initially refused to induct women into the monastic community. His maternal aunt, Maha Pajapati Gautami, was refused 3 times by the Buddha to be ordained. And once her husband had passed away, and on the 4th time, the Buddha attendant Ananda asked on her behalf. The exact details of this is that they were on a long walk during the very dry period, and many of the women were dehydrated, including Gautami. And when Ananda saw Gautami uh, all full of dust and thirsty, he said, "How are you doing?" And she started crying, and she says, "My physical body, not a problem. I just want to become a bhikkhuni, want to become ordained." And this moved Ananda to go to the Buddha, and after this difficult journey, and having been rejected 3 times. So out of compassion, Ananda decided to intercede. He went to the master and repeated her request 3 times, but each time the Buddha discouraged him. Do not be eager, Ananda, to obtain the going forth of women from the home into the homelessness in the Dharma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, the Buddha. Then Ananda, as I had said before, decided to use an indirect method. Is a woman able to gain the fruit of stream entry, or once returning, non-returning, or of arhatship? If one leaves the household life and enters into homelessness in the Dharma and the disciple of the Tathagata, and the Buddha has affirmed this. If a woman is capable to do this, and moreover, Maha Pajapati Gautami has rendered great service to the Blessed One. She is his aunt, his governess, and nurse, nourished him with her own milk after his mother died. Therefore, would it be good if the Blessed One would allow women to leave home for the homeless life in the Dharma and the discipline of the Tathagata? So he's using this logic now, and that at that time, the Buddha then said yes. But he needed to have somebody who would be the teacher of the bhikkhunis, and that person would have to have specific special traits. So 8 qualities of the teacher was necessary. And of course, the person who had these 8 qualities, this was Ananda. He was virtuous. He had extensive knowledge of the Dhamma. He was well acquainted with the Vinaya, the code of ethics. He was a good speaker, pleasant to be around, able to teach the Dharma to the bhikkhunis, elevating them. And he was always welcomed by the bhikkhunis who liked him, never had committed any offense, and he was fully ordained for at least 20 years. So he had all of these qualities. And then, so he was then said, okay, Ananda, you will be the teacher of the bhikkhunis. And Buddhism offered women a significantly more agency and spiritual independence than contemporary Brahma legal codes that were being formalized during that time. And so the spiritual quality and the Sangha monastic order was then put in place, and there was equal opportunity, etc., for women. And we can see that uh, through seeing what had happened historically in Buddhism, that there are certain women who stood out. In the first century, Buddha Mitra, Sarvastivadin female monastic, was recognized as the ninth Indian lineage master of Zen Buddhism. And then there's a little controversial one, Prajnatara, who is considered the 27th Indian lineage master and teacher of Bodhidharma. And so the question is whether Prajnatara was female, but I think so because Prajna and Tara both are female words. So it'd be very strange to give a man this name. So in the 12th century, the first females in master in Japan was ordained. And then in 1953, the first ordination. It took a while for everything, for ordination to be accepted all the way around. Still, in some schools of Buddhism, ordination of women they're still waiting. But in 53, women were first ordained in Dacian Temple in Taiwan. And there's a record that shows that there was a female monastic, Tian Yi, in 1919, who was ordained. In 1963, Venerable Cheng Yen was ordained by Master Inchun in Taiwan, and she's the person who founded Tzu Chi in 1966. Now, Tzu Chi is one of the large Buddhist organizations in the world. They provide assistance during emergencies, natural disasters, and things like that. So they have a very large base of volunteers and fundraising that they use to be able to go into places on the ground and help people. And regardless if they're Buddhist or not, you'll find them helping. They also had a booth in Chinatown. So there's a whole story about Master Cheng Yen and Master Pema Chodron is well known, ordained as a bhikkhuni uh, in the Buddhist tradition in Tibetan Buddhism in 1981. First American woman to be ordained as a Buddhist at that time. Venerable Thubten Chodron, who spent time here at Maba, also very well-known Tibetan Buddhist monastic. I just had a little bit of correspondence with the people of Savasti Abbey because they're in Spokane, and sometimes I communicate with them, and they assured me that their monastery is okay, and they send their well wishes to all of us here. There have been some laws in Thailand that prevented ordination and then allowed for it. Um, so some confusion there, but eventually monastics were able to be ordained in Thailand in 2002. 1996, there was a female monastic who was ordained in Robert Aiken's lineage, Zen lineage. 2009, bhikkhunis were ordained in the Theravadan tradition in Australia. This became a little controversial. That's a whole story unto itself. So we can say because of Ananda's natural kindness and compassion and concern, particularly for the welfare of all of the disciples, especially for women. But without Ananda, the fact that there might have only been three kinds of disciples, he was very instrumental in bringing this about a long time ago. But as you can see, progress continues to need to be made. And we're very fortunate here at Maha to have some wonderful female monastics who help us out, because without Venerable Kongshi, the grass would be growing all over. Not that she cuts the grass, but she inspires the people. I don't know if you've ever been on the tractor or not. Have you been on the tractor? But she keeps us together for sure. So I want to thank all of you for listening to my short talk today, and hopefully you will have a warm feeling in your heart for Ananda and also for all the women, and particularly for the female monastics who do so much. May all beings have happiness in the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the altruistic joy which is free from suffering, and may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion, and ignorance and bias.